soon as it comes up.
Rob Mugglestone. Now, there's a
Mm.
name. I haven't come across a name like that before. I suppose you had to live with that one in school. What and who is Rob Mugglestone?
Well, yes, I'd like to think I was getting Harry Potter royalties from the name, but sadly not. Um, well, I'm someone who has a quite a strong interest in, I guess, the motivations of people and what makes people work, and particularly what makes people perform at a high level. Um, we all start off much the same when we come into the world, but over time we develop and we do different things, and some of us end up as exceptional in our field. And I'm really intrigued as to how that happens, and what makes people reach those heights, stay at those heights, continue, and all of that kind of thing.
And so, how did you get into that particular field?
Um, well, yeah, going a long way back, a corporate background in banking and finance, leading to working with some really good consultants, and then ultimately moving into the consulting field. But the my interest in performance, I guess I've always done sport. I've always tried to do it at a high level, um, and I've always been around people who are better than me. I mean, everyone experiences that, and I kind of have a keen sense of uh, that. Um, and then it was, I suppose, working with a client organization and a colleague and friend, Roger Clark, and we started looking at, really initially looking at the sporting performance of our children and how they were competing and how we would develop those. That led to some of the theories that led to a master's in organizational psychology, gave me an opportunity to um, research and then write the book.
There you go. Well, you have a lot of analogies about sports in the book, and one of these types of questions that we have with regard to success, oftentimes we use the trifecta of skill, luck, and hard work or
Yeah.
work. How do you look at those three things in terms of making for success?
um, I think in particular the models that we look at in the book, the accelerate the curve and the omit model, are about leveraging all of those things, really. Um, so it's almost like, an analogy might be kind of learning magic, where you see a trick and you can't quite work it out, and then when you understand what's behind the trick, it looks very simple and straightforward, and with some practice and luck you're able to do that, but the simplicity of it remains. I guess what we're my aim with the models is to unpack some of the secrets of, how performance improvement comes about, and whether you can do things ultimately to accelerate those improvements. Because if you can accelerate at a different rate, if you can improve at a different rate to others, um, then it means you will continue to improve and be better than them. So it
Is that
fits very well.
is that another way of saying by doing all that, then you can diminish the reliance on luck?
Well, I think it was Gary Player who said, "The more I practice, the luckier I get," which, um,
The golfer, right?
yeah, and that is, that's fundamental. I think luck is a part of. Well, you're asking me now whether I kind of believe in luck and things like that, but
Mm,
I would like to think that if we all have the same share of luck, that how we take advantage of that luck, and whether we're in the whether we have the opportunity and the experience to take advantage of it, we're maximizing it really.
Yeah, I mean, with the luck stories is an interesting one at some level. Talk about the tipping point that Malcolm
Mm,
Gladwell wrote about, and how you have so many founders of huge tech corporations that became billionaires basically because they're all born within 9 months of one another. Uh,
yeah,
so Jobs, Gates, and so in company, and then you have in sports, just take tennis the example, the let chords, and some games you get zero let chords that go in your
mm,
favor, they drop back on your side, and the opponent gets three, let's say, maybe on a couple of
yeah,
killer points. So luck was on his side in that match, and what I'm hearing is actually a lot of that is just how you deal with the difference in luck.
yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's also a skill level, which is it's probably ultimately down to how close the ball was to the top of the net. And the
And what
closer it
and
was,
what spill and what spin you put on it as you drove
yeah.
it.
So what looks like luck is probably there's there's probably some good judgment in there as well.
Mm.
Um,
Love.
but I think you raise another point, which is the ability to move on after each point. And you hear and see great players sometimes completely stuck because they've had a run of points that have gone against them, and others who talk about their ability to play each point completely independently of anything that's happened before. And that ability in itself is one of the key skills of any sport really where you're looking to perform.
In the case of the scoring in tennis, what's remarkable about it is that you can do that at the point level, at the
Mm,
game level, at the set level.
yeah,
And these resets every time is how you can get a 0-6-6-0 kind of result, because you figured out how to stop the bleed,
mm,
change the momentum, and it does feel like, as your book points out, there's so many analogies within sports that we can bring to business. So let's
yes,
talk about your book, because
mm,
so it's called Beyond Marginal Gains: A Search for High Performance, and here's the catcher: high hanging fruit.
mm.
So what inspired you to write this book, and at what point did you realize that the traditional marginal gains philosophy that we always talk about needed to be re-examined?
Yeah. I think it was, well, the book came from some research, um, which was the research that I did around the timing of development activity, whether you front load that or backload it or kind of do a linear approach. So we very simply, from a very limited study that I did, we managed to prove the hypothesis that if you front load development time, you get an advantage without having to spend any more overall time. And the thinking behind it was that if you practice early on and you get above a threshold, any subsequent practice you do, even if it's only little, will is all you're practicing at a higher level. And contrast that with not doing that very much at the beginning and then cramming at the end. So there was a little that was the original um uh, thinking and the
Hypothesis.
yeah, and that's what led to we should write this up in a book. The OMIT model, the optimal, maximal, incremental threshold, um, came out of some work I was doing with a client organization, and it seemed to fit very nicely with the other model, the accelerate the curve model. So both of those things, and then of course I realized that all of that talks about that there's a strong link with marginal gains. So it felt a nice way of writing the book would be to contrast it with marginal gains and to see or show how traditional marginal gains, if you like, fits into my models, but they're a relatively small part of it.
Mm.
And then, I love the fact that marginal gains is talked about a lot. It's very easily understood. It sounds great, and for a lot of people, um, pretty much anything you do to improve your performance will improve your overall performance. But the closer you get to optimal performance, or the highest level, the harder it is to find things to improve. You're also competing with plenty of other people who are also trying to improve. So looking for something that gives you an advantage was key. Hence the high hanging fruit, because the low hanging fruit's easy. So the easy marginal gains, low hanging fruit, everyone can do. You don't need the help of a psychologist or my book to do that.
It sort of feels like a lot of those high hanging fruits would be in the form of a marginal gain for a top sports person, for example. Let's say I'm a high ranking player. I can hit a forehand into the corner 95% of the time, let's say 1 meter square corner. So the high hanging fruit is hitting 96%.
Yeah, maybe. I suppose at this point I should add that I'm not a sports psychologist.
Unlike Peter Sears, who put us in touch.
Of course. What I like about sport is that the analogies fit so well with organizational psychology. And of course, a lot of sports people and teams and organizations are very clear about what performance looks like. It's easier to be if you're in the top 100 tennis players in the world. I'm not sure if you're in the top 100 CEOs in the world. How would you know? So yes, the thing for me about marginal gains is everyone might be looking for the same gain. So they might all be looking to improve their percentage of hitting that spot, or their percentage of first serves in, or whatever. But what my broader theory is that, well, this is coming to kind of some of the specifics of the book, but not all gains are marginal. Not all gains can be marginal, and some of them, for example, that I would call threshold, you don't see any difference in performance at a marginal level until you reach the next threshold. So my go-to example is always about if you're trying to lift a 25 kilo weight and you can only lift 20 kilos, that's your capacity, marginally improving to 21 or 22 or 23 or 24. You will see those individual improvements. You will be able to say to yourself, I am marginally improving. I've gone from 20 in marginal increments all the way up to 24, but you still can't lift a 25 kilo bag or weight or whatever it is. And you might have 10 or 20 different aspects of your performance that are all that are all analogous to that weight. And you might be seeing individual performance improvements in all of those areas, but the outcome is not there. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that I think, and I've seen this particularly with high performers, they tend to over rely on strengths and downplay their weaknesses. So they
Run around their backhand.
exactly, they have allowable weaknesses. And often it's because their overall performance is good enough to overcome their weaknesses, which is why they're allowable. But if you were looking in absolute terms for high performance, you would look at those weaknesses and say, what can we do about those? Are they below a key threshold?
Yeah, there's always a cost, right? There's in assessing
Yes.
which one I should be plugging or figuring out to optimize or to transform, and the cost can be an opportunity cost amongst other things, because you're doing this instead of that, and
Of
then
course.
so it might take more time, it might take more energy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the more you're aware of all of the different facets to your performance, if we're looking at sport, you're looking at diet, nutrition, health, fitness, injury, as well as all the techniques of whatever it is you play. And you can be, I think, easily overwhelmed with the sheer volume of things that you could work on to improve performance. And if we compare that organizationally, you could say the same in any kind of organization. There are so many things that the organization could work on, and choosing those always comes with a cost and an opportunity cost. So if we upgrade the IT system, that's a budget that we can't spend on something else. If we recruit more people, that's coming out of a budget that doesn't get to go on anything else. So yeah, there's always organizationally, it might be down to cost from a sports perspective, whether you're, an amateur or professional, there will be costs too.
Mm. So, how would you describe? There are two parts to this question. How would you
Mm.
describe the dangers of relying on incremental changes? And to what extent is that a more pregnant question in today's sort of VUCA world, volatile, chaotic, fast world?
Yeah, well, the danger of relying on traditional marginal gains, if you like. I don't like calling them that. It feels it feels like I'm trying to replace them, but we know what we mean when we say that. I guess the danger is they will become um, less meaningful as you go on, so they'll have a smaller impact. You're reliant to a degree on some luck in finding the right marginal gains to improve. But the impact, my guess is the impact will diminish over time. And we need to contrast that with, of course, the expectation that performance improvements decline over time. So I think part of it is because we have an expectation, all learning curves are kind of steeper at the beginning and then flatten off. So there is an expectation that, I don't know, Roger Federer in the first 5 years of his tennis career was improving at a greater rate than in the middle 5 years. So some of it is about, let me try and just answer your question though. I think the danger is you're relying on luck of picking the right things and continuing to pick the right things to marginally improve, and relying on the fact that each of those marginal gains will have an overall impact on performance, and they might not. In the risk in the VUCA world is that time and resources might appear restricted because there's a much greater need to do things quickly or have an impact more quickly. I think the other impact might be that as we see in most things, the spread of resources is so much wider now. Watching Tour de France this week, and the top teams, their budget is 4 or 5 times the budget of the smaller teams to do effectively the same job. So I think that degree of uncertainty and the chaos that brings is that everyone's trying to do different things or the same thing with different results, or different resources rather. So what I'm promoting, if you like, is to spend some time mapping it out and applying some science and thinking to it, and saying, of all these things that I could do, how do I choose which ones are going to have the greater impact? How do I choose, how do I work out what the cost is for each marginal gain and choose accordingly?
So I wanted to swing back into something you talk about, which I'd not been aware of, which is the cap on spending in the Formula One that you write about,
Mm.
which is comparable to the sort of way that the sports are operated in the United States, where there's a cap on
Yeah.
the amount of salaries you're allowed to have. And so you're all supposed to be operating within some sort of similar framework, which means you're not benefiting from having deeper pockets, one team
Yeah.
versus the other. And to what extent is that cap idea parallelable in a corporate world, or is it, or
Mm.
should we be thinking unlimited at some level in the corporate world? As you get bigger, you just have more strength and you can monopolize. And
Yeah, wow, that's a good question. To a degree in the corporate world, I guess it is almost unlimited. Um, I think if you're comparing competitors within the same industry, the likelihood is they're operating with roughly the same cost base, roughly the same um, revenue stream and pricing structure for what it is they're selling. Um, but yeah, there's volume, there's economies of scale, there's all kinds of things which are pretty well um, established. I think in a way, what I'm promoting in my book is not increasing the level of fairness, it's increasing the level of unfairness. So all of the other theories I talk about, I am really promoting them as ways of manipulating these things to your advantage. So
mm,
I'm saying if there is a cost cap, work out what the what the penalty is for exceeding it, and work out whether that is worth doing. Um, in a corporate world, I guess that would be um, I don't know what kind of things can you. Oh, well, I think things like if I bring it back to the examples I talk about in the book, things like cumulative advantage. Um, so we know there's a real advantage for being first or even in the top 10 or whatever. Um, if my book won't be and definitely isn't, but if I was in the Sunday Times top 20 bestsellers, I would sell a lot more copies by virtue of being in that list. So you could argue that um, getting in that list should be an aim. I could prove my own theories by getting into that list.
yeah, you remind me of a type of a mantra, which is break the rules and ask for permission later.
Yeah.
Just, go for it. One of the areas that intrigued me when I worked in a corporate, I worked at L'Oreal for 16 years, and
Mm.
we were a very financially driven company. And it drove me bonkers the way we would incrementally look at our budget line by line and say, budget for 2026, we have a target of plus 10. This line has to go down -2. This line has to go down -1. Blah, 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 blah. And these lines has to go up, obviously, in order for us to get the profitability and the revenue growth.
Yeah.
And it does feel like the financial world and most of the trainings, if you will, seem to follow on incremental approaches as opposed to transformational approaches. And there's no
Yeah.
P&L that's really good at explaining the decay that you talked about of business or skill sets and
Yeah.
the need for revolution.
Yeah. I think. I mean, if you look at things like I don't know, the rollout of, let's say, a rollout of a new piece of software in an organization. If you did it like most organizations do learning and development, they just roll it out over a long period of time. So let's even say over 2 years. By the end of 2 years, everyone is now up to speed. But you only really get the benefits once everyone has the new way of working or whatever it is. So actually, whilst it's not simpler to do and it would be harder and it would impact budgets and all the rest of it, the better way to do it would be to implement it all as soon as you can. But most organizations don't do that. They look at all the things they've got to implement, and they implement them all as gradually as they need to in order to have a manageable impact on the organization, rather than saying, well, instead of implementing these 5 things slowly, what would be the impact if we launched one of them quickly at the expense of the other 4? And then when we've done that one, let's do the second one quickly.
Yeah, prioritization,
Yeah.
understanding the opportunity cost, something that politicians could probably do well with understanding as well.
Yeah.
Without
And
getting
I think
something.
you raise a great example about corporate budgets, that everyone then looks at their bit. And I think when you look at, I still think the great example of Jeff Bezos in the early days of Amazon with his wooden door as his desk. He could have spent money upgrading his door, upgrading his desk, um, but it wouldn't have fundamentally changed the way he was building the business. But if it had been run like a traditional organization, there'd have been a office furniture budget, and somebody would have been responsible for spending that budget, and their job would have been to find the best way of buying desks, and everyone might have ended up with a different desk, and they'd have done their job. And that's what I mean by not all incremental gains make a difference on the end result.
No doubt.
So if you're looking for ultimate final, is this going to have an impact? You need to be really focused on what that goal is.
It does make me feel like I want to wobble into the idea of culture
Mm.
and how that is. But before, maybe this is an opportunity to start talking about your frameworks. But how and when should an organization strive to bust out of the threshold or get a new threshold or go for a massive transformational change?
I think it's got to come down to the goal. Um, I'm not a big fan of transformational change just for the sake of it. A lot of change happens when new people come into an organization. So a new CEO will often feel that they have to make changes. It feels like there's not a lot of kudos attached to a CEO coming in and doing nothing.
First 100 days, or should we
Yeah,
say the first 47 days now, according
yeah,
to Mr. Trump?
yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? What can I do differently in that time, rather than can I do nothing but maintain everything that's great? I don't know. You That comes down to why the CEO changed in the first place, I guess. Um, uh, One of the nice things about the models in the book is that they work at all levels of granularity. So you could be one person in a 10,000 person organization saying, this is my job. These are all the bits of my job that all lead to my overall performance. And I can look at those and work out how I shift. You could go more granular than that and take one of those aspects and break that down into multiple parts and say, what impact, which of those smaller bits do I work on? Or you can look at it whole organizationally and say, what's the organization's goal? What are the different things that impact on that? And how can we break it down? And which ones do we work on? And then you can work out which ones are incremental and which ones are threshold, which ones, because the other thing I haven't talked about yet is the maximal optimal dichotomy. Not everything needs to be taken to its maximal. So it might be nice to keep upgrading my laptop, but if it does everything I need it to do, then its own threshold is an optimal one. I don't need to keep upgrading it. And so recognizing what's optimal and what's maximal is important. Even, I mean, sales, you could argue that sales could be either, and that might be different for each organization, because some organizations, if they bring in too many sales, they might not be able to deliver, or that might impact, all kinds of other things.
including next year's budget.
Yeah. Or they might not have enough people, or they might not be able to recruit as many people, or um, so sometimes sales, which we always think of as being surely maximal, surely much as possible would be brilliant.
What are the things that are getting in the way of organizations, leaders from distinguishing between optimal and maximal? I want to put out there ego and
Mm.
vanity are a couple of the things which people get swayed by. How would you look at that, Rob?
I think that's a yeah. I think ego and vanity probably have a bigger impact than we think. Um, even the example of upgrading my laptop, to some degree, or my phone, to some degree, is a vanity thing. Is it important when I'm traveling? If I'm with a group of clients from an investment bank, what how would it look if I was using a 20-year-old Nokia?
Right, and it sort of brings up like the door,
But
that on
yeah.
on Bezos's desk. Maybe for clients coming in, what sort of image
Mm.
does a door as a desk
Yeah.
have? And maybe this is where it brings up this notion of culture,
Yeah.
where what how do we actually operate?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, that is what culture is, isn't it? How do we do things around here is how we often describe culture. And understanding, having an easy way to describe that culture helps everyone. Um, you don't want to start putting it in a 10-page document. And examples of things like a door, whilst they look like, on the one hand, you say, well, that might offend somebody's vanity or ego. Actually, I think it's probably the other way around. If you go far enough, it actually gives people an opportunity to say, I'm glad you asked me about my desk, because there's a reason why I have an old door for a desk. And that in itself embodies the culture of the organization, which is we don't do things that are unnecessary, or we have
Well,
to
of
be
course,
really clear. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, really, frankly, the door is neither optimal nor maximal. It's just we
Mm.
don't give a toss about it. We work on other things that are more important for the business.
Yeah. Well, I think it is absolutely optimal. Is it big enough and stable? Does it do the job of a desk? And if it does the job of the desk, then it doesn't need to do it any better than that, unless there's a really clear advantage, another threshold where significantly better would deliver some better outcomes.
Well, Chris, I have a door that has bevels in it, and sort of it's not straight. So that's what I was
Mhm.
thinking about, how it's not optimal.
Yeah. Yeah.
But let's talk. I want to talk about high hanging fruit because that's a
Mm.
term that I've absolutely never really come across. I
Mhm.
mean, of course, you have it in your mind, low hanging fruit, high hanging fruit. Where do business leaders look for the high hanging fruit? How can they start to categorize this element of my business as a high hanging fruit to go after?
Yeah. Um, that's a good question. I think it in part it's cultural, and in part it's about saying, um, in a way, you're saying that the easy stuff will look after itself. But if we're going to put some effort into this, let's um, let's apply some very focused effort and find the more difficult bits. And partly that's because you know that everyone else will be looking at the low hanging fruit still. So I think there's a competitive advantage to saying, what is the more difficult things that we could do? What are you're looking for nuance, you're looking for the science of psychology to deliver some results. Ultimately, I I see my role and my psychology as a science, and I want it to deliver results. I don't want psychology to be seen as just a list of things that sound like common sense to people. I want it to be hard science with real kind of um, fundamentally deliverable outcomes.
in order for it to qualify as high hanging,
Mm.
I'm suspecting that it means it's got to be expensive or difficult.
Um, hmm. Not necessarily. Um, I'm glad you've asked it like that because it's making me think about it. Um, I think it could just be harder to find. So, yes, there could be a cost in, yeah, there's an inherent cost in stopping and searching and finding it and then saying, what is it that we do? I'd also like, I don't know, I'd like to be able to throw some examples in at this point of, where some of the high hanging fruit would be cheap and easy. Um,
But maybe without having one, you can just
mm,
talk about being counterintuitive, for example.
mm,
Try to think in a different way, and that may
yeah,
not be the standard, but by having a different prism, all of a sudden it becomes an accessible high hanging fruit, just because you're
yeah,
looking at it from, you come into an industry from a different industry's perspective. Maybe it would be a good time to talk about one of the case studies. You have many case studies.
mm,
It seemed like most of them were around sports, but the one that
mm,
really piqued my interest was the rapper AJ Tracy. Of course, I have no
yeah,
idea. I haven't listened to any of his music, but also called Che Grant in real life. Um,
yeah.
talk us, Give us a little bit of background on the case and how the OMIT and ATC models work into the case of a rapper of all people.
Exactly. Um, I was listening. The great Jake Humphrey and Damien Hughes, who do the High Performance podcast. Um, I should add before I say that the examples from the book I pick up from anywhere, um, and some of them were old examples that you just hear somebody talking and you think without them knowing it, they are describing my theories, and it's great to hear that. So when um, when Damien and Jake interviewed AJ Tracy, Che, um, I just really liked that there were just examples that were popping out all the time. So I think the clearest one was that he is a rapper. Um, the genre of music is irrelevant.
Of
Ultimately,
course.
he's a music artist, and was um, trying to be a big music artist instead of a little one. Um, and he was at university at the time, and his mum said to him, "If you want to pursue this music thing, um, I'll support you for a year. Drop out of university, give music your best shot, and we'll see what happens." Um, and I'm sure that's happened multiple times for lots of different people in lots of different industries and things where they've had the opportunity to focus on one thing and see if they can make it work.
If I can add, not many mothers
Yeah.
do that. So that's
Mm.
a hat tip to his mother.
Yeah, definitely. So what he then did, which I thought was different and really speaks to my book, was that he didn't then focus on his music. The kind of the obvious thing is you go, right, well, if I'm going to be a musician for a year to see if I can make it, what I need to do is knuckle down and write some really good music. Um, he talks about what was important for his success was that he wasn't well known enough. So he put his effort and focus and attention into um, becoming recognized. So really putting high quality effort into sending demos into radio stations, personalizing the messages that he was sending um, to DJs and things in order to get his first break, I suppose. So the nice thing for me is that, or not the nice thing for me, that the way I see it in the book was that the key threshold that he had to reach was his audience. He had to be mainstream enough to get radio play. If he got radio play, he would, that kind of accelerates everything. So there's lots of things there about cumulative advantage. There's lots of links to different bits of the book, even things like, oh, I don't know, there's something called the Galatea effect, which is linked to, what's it called? The Pygmalion effect, where, so Galatea effect is effectively you meet your own expectations. So his expectations were, I can make this work. I know where I need to focus, which is on my exposure, and I'll put a lot of effort and exposure into getting noticed. And I think it was Sean Anderson on Radio 1, or one of the Radio 1 extra programs, listened to one of his demos, played it, and it went from there. But the key thing for me is, or why I've got it as an example in the book, is that I think certainly looked at it from my own experience and thought, if I went away for a year to focus on one thing, I'd have focused on the music, not on the exposure.
Yeah. So his accelerating the curve in
Yeah,
this was looking at a exposure, getting his name to be known.
yeah,
And he focused on that as opposed to what typically would have done, which is write some more music.
yeah. If I can just write a better song, it'll get me all the exposure I need. And maybe that is the case. But to have recognized that it was exposure that he needed. And for me, with the book, what I've wanted to do all the way through it is to say, all of the things I'm talking about really exist in the natural world. So there are plenty of people like Che who have done thing and got over the threshold and have done it. So they all exist. What I've done is put some science behind it and say, if he hadn't done that, if you sat down with a rap artist and said, all of these things, your map of all of the things that contribute to your success as an artist, which ones are you overachieving on? Which ones are you underachieving on? Which ones could you develop? What would be the cost of developing? I'd like to think that some of the time, I'd like to think specifically with AJ Tracy, that he'd have said, he'd looked at the map and said, my music's already good enough. How do I get it out there? So that's where I'm kind of thinking the science of the book is about, is very applicable to every situation, where you say, what are the things that contribute to my success? Which ones can I focus on? Which ones can I develop?
All right. So a couple, as we wind down, a couple last questions. The first one is for new or leaders in general. There's clearly a lot of burnout, a lot of anxiety, depression, mental health issues, not to mention diminishing returns from doing so much. What advice would you have for leaders who are listening, who want to foster a culture of high performance and yet avoid these other issues which are so mainstream?
My initial response would be that, my initial response would be that resilience is part of everybody's skill set, and we all have resilience to a greater or lesser degree. It is something that absolutely can be developed. I kind of want to put a caveat with that, which is I'm not saying for burnout and everything. What I'm not saying is just get tougher, because that seems to diminish entirely the nature of it. I think what I'm saying generally is that physical health, mental health, and the ability to turn up and do a good job are things that we no longer should be taking for granted. It's no longer a case that you just kind of expect that people will work through everything, whatever's thrown at them, because there will be a cost. Going back to your earlier point, there will be a cost. In a way, what I'm kind of saying is, all of those aspects of performance should be undertaken knowing what the costs are. So
Yeah.
I've gone round in circles a bit. Partly because when you said it, there's quite a big bit in the book about resilience. And one of the things I like about resilience is that it's both individual and organizational, and it's also developable. So if it was just something that you can't change, like your height or something like that, it was just innate, then we'd be looking at how to deal with it differently. But the fact that it's not innate, the fact that it is developable, the fact that we understand resilience and the nature of it, it's not. Yeah, I think what I'm not saying is develop resilience so that you can pile more on people. I think it's about develop resilience so that you can, as just one of the aspects of your performance. If resilience helps you to perform better, and I'm talking about performance, not in a kind of not in a corporate. There's one of my favorite Dilbert cartoons, going back a long time, is the agenda for the annual company away day, which is how can we get people to do more for less. That was item 1, and 2 is why is morale so low.
Mhm.
So I don't see resilience as a way of how can we get people to do more for less. I see it as, if people are high performing, we need to create the conditions that allow them to perform at their best, and taking into account physical and mental attributes. If you're a tennis player, we would want you to not roll over on your ankle, not get tennis elbow, not have shoulder injuries, not and there will be players who are more susceptible to those things than others.
It does bring up, we can't wade into it, but this notion of risk and failure in
Mm.
cultures. Let's just finish with the last question, which is, you obviously writing a book takes a whole bunch of effort, a lot of research. And I was just wondering for you, Rob, to what extent your views on high performance might have evolved in the writing of it.
Oh, um, yeah, yeah, massively. I
Mm.
think partly because writing a book like this, you can't help but do it in a reflective way, noticing how much your own high performance is about writing a book and delivering a book on high performance.
Very meta.
Yeah, oh, totally. And there would be days when I would be completely consumed and get absolutely nothing done because I'd be navel gazing at the bizarre contrast between trying to write a book about high performance and also at the same time being seemingly unable to write anything at all. So yes, quite meta in one respect. And the other aspect was um, going down the kind of the psychology research rabbit holes of finding theories and seeing things connect with mine, not in a way so years ago, I actually, when these ideas first came about, I assumed somebody else had thought of them already, and it was just a question of me finding them so that I could find what they were about. And some years later you realize that they don't exist anywhere else, so you're going to have to write them up yourself. But what I liked is that I was able to find so many theories, from learned optimism to relative age effect, cumulative advantage, um, Pareto, all these things which allowed me to say that they all kind of feed into it in some way.
Mm,
So yeah, it was a huge learning experience. I think the original outline for the book was the two concepts, how they might link to other theories, and some examples in the real world. And at that level, definitely delivered all of those three, but the content of those three changed completely.
the cases and everything, the OMIT
Mm,
and the ATC. All right, Rob,
yeah.
great. Thank you for joining me for a fun chat conversation about this. What would be the way for someone to be able to get the book or get in touch with you should they wish to explore further working with you?
The book's available through Amazon and all good booksellers. It's available also direct through Routledge, the publisher, often discounted on Routledge, so do have a look there.
I'll
There
put
is
the
a
show
web,
notes.
yeah, there's a website, beyondmarginalgains.com, where I will look to build that as we go. And ultimately, I'd love it as a community where people can kind of wade in and ask me questions and get kind of really practical. Yeah, get practical in how they develop. So lots of opportunities. Email me through that. I'd love to hear from people who are reading the book and either getting something from it or not getting something from it.
Feedback. Hey, listen, Rob,
Mm.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Minter.